Welcome to another Workplace Intelligence LinkedIn Live. Comment where you're joining from. We are very excited about today's webcast. This LinkedIn Live, we've had so much fun, so many good conversations over the years, and today will be no different. We're joined with Luke Talbot, the Chief Product and Technology Officer at Flip, who is going to be talking about the results and implications of a new global survey that we worked on, Workplace Intelligence, with them of 1,500 multi-generational frontline workers and managers in various industries. And we've really focused on our sample in terms of who we polled: US, UK, and Germany. So it's a nice global sample. It gives you some real understanding of the implications and differences between countries and how frontline workers and their managers are upskilling and training and communicating. The study in itself explores the frontline worker experience with skills development, training, technology access, and much more. The goal today really is to give you the insights from the study and just from our shared experiences that will help you close the generational skills gap for frontline workers. Now, a little bit about Luke. Luke has got a pretty extensive background. He spent 25 years in technology, 10 years in telecom, 7 years in surveys, and 3 years working for a digital adoption software startup. And currently, he's in charge of the research and development of the Flip app, which connects and supports the frontline workforce. That's why they're obviously very interested in this study and working with us on it. So please be sure to leave a question, a comment, any thoughts that you have during the event. We'll definitely answer them. Luke, it's great to have you here, and I'm really excited to learn about your perspectives on engaging frontline workers and your views on the study that we worked on together.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dan. Really excited to be here as well. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I'm also super excited about this survey. And as you rightly said, I spent quite a long time in my career working on cool software and cool solutions. And I think certainly in the last 18 to 24 months, I've been thinking more and more about how much time I've spent in my career focusing on desk-based users and their experiences. But I think they're pretty well served now. So I've decided to spend the rest of my career, at least for now, working on the frontline worker experience and trying to close the gap there a little bit. So, and what better time to do it? This is a pretty much a monumentous shift that we're about to go through in the frontline workforce.
And the big shift from a generational perspective is we have a lot of people who are, aging in the workforce, maybe ready to retire, and there's a big knowledge gap. What are the biggest risks you see that companies are facing with mass retirement of frontline workers?
Yeah, I mean, you could list a dozen, right? But what I've done is I've tried to, I did a bit of homework for this and I thought, okay, what are the risks? Because it's very easy to list 2 or 3, but then you're just always going to be forgetting a few. So I did actually list them. And when you start to think about it, with like 59% of the most experienced retail and manufacturing workers are going to basically retire in the next 5 years, then that's kind of crazy. So the first one I picked up on is loss of tribal knowledge. So we're talking about like decades of this is how we really get things done inside an organization, and that's just going to vanish, right? It's not going to go. It's not if you're just focusing on manually transferring it to other people, it's not on the internet. It's basically in Doris's head. And when Doris, goes off in her caravan to Cornwall and spends the rest of her life surfing, then you're going to lose that. So there's a massive productivity dip, rookie mistakes, longer onboarding, and a million, oh my God, where's that thing we used to do moments in the organization. And then you've got these skill gaps. So you've got many frontline workers are highly skilled, even if they're not always respected as such, actually, which is one of the things that shocked me the most coming into the frontline worker industry. So things like welding, machining, system maintenance, field repair, and frontline managers are already struggling to onboard and upskill their teams. So you've got like 96% of frontline managers are saying there are skill gaps in the workplace. So you lose that, then pretty much that's the core of your industry. So that causes drops in quality, delays. We've then got things like operational disruption. I mean, you just can't run a factory or a logistic hub or a power station or whatever with LinkedIn influencers and PowerPoint people like me, right? So it's just not possible to do that. So you've got shutdowns, customer delays, missed SLAs, etc. And then maybe some of the ones that people don't think about so much, they're not so obvious. You've got cultural shifts. And certainly I've noticed this in my experience. When you go to work for a company, what do we call culture, right? It's basically just, the combination of all the people we have and the things we do and the things we don't do and what we allow to happen, what we don't. But veteran workers, they're often like the anchor point, like these nexus points in the organization that really anchor that culture. And when they go, that workplace vibe will and can shift. And not always in a good way. So you can have loss of morale, you can have engagement dips, identity crises, an increase in quiet quitting as people just basically switch off. And then things like succession gaps. I don't think people think enough about who's going to do the job after X. And it's often something we just kick into the long grass, right? It's a big topic, but we just think, okay, we'll do it later. So leadership gaps, XYZ. And that just causes middle managers to really struggle because they don't have anyone to plug that gap. And then there's basically just two more that I picked up: increased cost to attract and retain talent. And I think the reason for that is that newer generations do want different things from employers than maybe their 50, 60-year-old colleagues wanted when they first started to work. They want more flexibility. They want to understand the purpose of what they're doing. They, maybe want breaks so they can check their social media, stuff like that. So I think with that, as the older generations leave the workforce, there can be an increase in labor costs, headache for HR, that sort of stuff. And then finally, it's this tech transition trouble. So I think a lot of companies are trying to digitize their way out of this problem, which is a good thing to do. And obviously from a tech company, I would say, please invest in technology. But automating a process that one guy knows how to do, that's not easy. You need the documentation. You need to spend time doing that properly. So there's a lot of failed tech rollouts, a lot of increased downtime, expensive consultants who tell you what you already knew. That sort of stuff is definitely a risk as well. So that's just a taster. There are probably a dozen more that the listeners can think about that I haven't even mentioned.
And it's an immediate problem too. Just like anytime we research like succession planning and training, there's so much focus on the now and not as much preparation for the future. But the future is like here, right?
Yeah.
At least in America, you have 12,000 baby boomers who turn retirement age every single day. So this drain of talent is happening very, very quickly. So you need to wrap your head around it. And that's a part of what we did in the survey as we looked at some industries that are very prevalent with frontline workers, retail, manufacturing, and these are really, really big industries. And especially retail, the turnover rate is pretty high. And so why do you think that these industries are more susceptible to the knowledge drain than maybe other industries?
Yeah, I mean, as always with everything, it's really hard to generalize. But I would say, without wanting to sound disrespectful to some companies, I think retail and manufacturing, they're a bit like that relative who just refuses to back up their photos because it's all on my phone or something. And then when the phone dies, yeah, it's just gone. So you've got there's this massive reliance on tacit knowledge. So less sort of investment in new tech to be able to help to digitize all of this means that you're over reliant on people knowing this. So the exact feel of when a machine is switched off, for instance, or broken, or something's kind of just not quite right with the system, or exactly what to do in a particular situation when a customer wants this and you don't know exactly how to answer that, or just I read this phrase somewhere and I love the visual of it. It's basically this unwritten choreography of a warehouse during peak season. I just really like that because it just moves, it flows and it moves, not because, necessarily of a process, but also because of the people within it, right? So when these people leave, it's not just retirement, it's like a memory wipe for the organization. And I think the training is often quite informal in those environments. We expect people to be up to speed very, very quickly. And they kind of have this watch and learn approach to knowledge transfer. And I think that's quite hard to formalize. It's quite hard to make consistent. And if you're relying on it right now, then that I think is quite risky.
Yeah, and it takes time to be a fully productive employee too. This is not
Yeah.
overnight. A lot of training happens on the job, right? You
Yeah.
watch someone else do it and you're like, oh, let me try and do this, and maybe get feedback from that person who's done it for years.
Yeah.
So if you don't have that person to encourage you, mentor you, and offer that support, or they notice you might be able to do something better, or you did something wrong that maybe hurts the customer, like without that level of kind of support and knowledge, you're kind of lost.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think there are some very simple steps that you can take as a company to try to formalize that. And I think we'll touch on some of them throughout this session. But I think there are things that you can do in the immediate case, and they're just people things, right? Putting in place more formal process, more scalable processes. But also there are tech answers to some of these questions as well, right? And I think if you think that 82% of knowledge is held by workers over 55 years old, according to our survey, then that's kind of crazy, right? That's a hell of amount of knowledge that's held inside somebody's head. So transferring that manually is going to take too long.
So how do we do it digitally? How do we develop this digital repository that people can, connect to and get that information like immediately to be able to, because everything is immediate now, let's be honest. No one's waiting 48 hours or a week for anything. Everyone's
Yeah.
like, I need this knowledge. I need it now because I have this problem and I need to correct it.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where, of course, we could focus on just get some technology in that just where you can just dump all the knowledge. But in reality, you're not going to have your older workforce going into a system and just writing absolutely everything down that they know. That's probably not going to happen. But I do think you need to. So I think the first thing is to pretty much start focusing on some immediately scalable ways to enable knowledge sharing. And those don't necessarily mean, okay, I want you to just document everything you do in a day. That's kind of what you might want to do if you were doing a handover to somebody very one-to-one for a very specific role. But I think for other things, just putting in place some kind of technology where you can knowledge share is the first step, and something where you can socialize that. So for instance, we came up with some low staff time commitment ways of actually knowledge sharing. And some of it is simply just having a weekly top tip. There's a very small amount of time you need to invest in that, but also targeted micro learning. Just a very quick video. This is how I do this. This is how I do this. And if you start to sort of have that culture backed up by a way of, a technological way of socializing that to the right people, then actually you can start to build a culture of knowledge sharing, which doesn't involve, making it difficult for Dave because he has to get everyone into a classroom or walk people through it, or it consumes huge amounts of his day. I think one of the stats, I'm trying to get it here, is, here we are. So on average, 14 hours a week per employee is spent trying to basically train other people how to do the job. And that broken down into things like just correcting their mistakes, teaching or training, troubleshooting tech or equipment for them, helping co-workers with their tasks. And I guess it's even worse. So the segment that is the most impacted by this is millennials. So it's not just about, we're not talking about just 55, 60-year-olds. We're talking about the people in the middle. This kind of like, often spoken about generation of millennials, people just a little bit younger than me, I guess, who are doing, about 16 to 17 hours a week. Actually just trying to make sure everything the younger generations do is working.
We have one comment. Anyone else have a Doris on their team? The one who knows how everything works, but none of it's written down.
I mean, I do. I literally have a Doris. She's called Doris as well.
We got to get Doris or whomever to start writing things down, right? That's how we're going to
It's
help
funny.
close that
I
gap.
tend to use Dave as my go-to name for like the person who does stuff. So yeah.
I like this comment, Jody. My definition for culture is how we do things here. That's really what
That's
it comes
great.
down to, though, right?
I love
Like
that. Yeah,
how we
yeah.
speak about things, how we connect, just how we operate. Operational
Yeah.
system, right?
Yeah, and I heard somebody once say that it's culture is the intersect. I love talking in sort of Venn diagrams. So culture is the intersect of what we let happen and what we don't let happen. And I think sometimes having the what we don't let happen in there, how do we not do things here, is
Yes.
super important to give you that frame, right? That swim lane, and getting everybody into that, because that cultural shift when people leave and take it with them is huge.
Yeah, I like it. It's like flexibility with some constraints because
Totally.
you do want people to be able to improve the culture too. Nothing's perfect, and the world keeps evolving, and so there
Yeah.
might be better ways to do it. And that's a good way to engage people of different generations. Younger generations want to maybe shake things up, but within
Yeah.
constraints.
Yeah. I heard a previous head of people I had said that every new person you hire changes your culture.
Yeah,
Right.
not all cultures allow you to digitize. So this comment, been there in manufacturing culture, did not allow to digitize. So that company, in a sense,
Yeah.
can fall behind long term then, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we could talk longer about that, right? The companies that fail to adopt, the companies do adopt, but also I have opinions on digitalization, right? Because we talk about digitalization, but which for me is built up of two sides. There's digitizing stuff and then there's automating stuff. And I think if you
Yes.
just digitize, then actually you're in many cases making extra layers of complexity, putting in place UIs in front of people who've not used a UI for that before. And it's actually much more difficult. So I'm thinking about my neighbors, a policeman, my wife works for the health service, and the amount of stuff they have to do that their previous generations didn't have to do, which actually gets in the way of the job they were paid to do.
Yeah, so they're adding to the problem, not solving the problem. They're creating more
Yeah,
work for themselves.
exactly right. Yeah.
Here's a good question. Do you guys think training systems would be able to cover everything important in shorter time?
Oh, that's a big question. Everything important seems like a huge, huge sentence, right? I don't know if we can narrow that down a little bit. I mean, I don't think it's just up to training systems, right? So I think training systems, they serve a purpose when people are in that mode of training. But I think it's not just about when you're training, it's also about in the moment, right? There's this thing where it's often better to learn on the job. Why? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's immediately accessible, right? You're like, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to apply that knowledge straight away. So watch me do it. I'll watch you do it. And then you can do it on your own, sort of thing. And I think training obviously gets you out of that loop. So I don't think the answer is just in a training system. I think it's part of it, but I think it's also in, everything, your collaboration, your comms system, everything.
Yeah, it's one of those D, all of the aboves, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's
You
a
think
hard
about it
answer,
as a
right? Yeah.
survey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have another one. Anyone in the chat got tips on how you've built a culture of knowledge sharing? Yeah, it's something you mentioned, the culture of knowledge sharing. Like as we've talked about previously, like my book Back to Human, like shared learning is a whole chapter
Yeah.
because I think that's the secret to building that culture where people are just naturally helping each other, and there's systems around that.
That's it. I mean, I'd love to hear from people in the chat to see what they think, but I also think especially with younger generations entering the workforce, they are used to a different way of learning, right? You see people using TikTok, YouTube, very short videos showing you how you do stuff. And if you can apply that to the workplace, if you imagine someone saying, hey, this is how I do stuff, and you build that culture of it's okay to do that, then suddenly you've got on your lunch break, you're just watching small clips, small videos of people showing you how to do stuff, or maybe 3 bullet points, what not to forget when you do X, that sort of thing. It's quite nice as well.
Absolutely. What role does poor onboarding and lack of training play in Gen Z's decision to leave frontline industries?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I think younger generations, I said it before, they have different expectations, right? They want flexibility, they want purpose. They also just want Wi-Fi that doesn't suck. And they want to be able to, and most frontline companies, your phone is in a locker, but as soon as you're on your 5-minute break, you're going to run straight to your locker, grab your phone, do your stuff, right? So there's a completely different expectation of your relationship with technology as a frontline worker now than there used to be. And they have built-in impatience with poor experience. So that's like literally when you get a younger, I have 2 kids, they're both teenagers, late teens, they've started working. They have zero patience for something they don't want to do. And you have this kind of catch-22. You've got, according to the survey anyway, half of younger workers don't feel appreciated. So they're almost not considered skilled enough when they work because of their age, I guess, primarily. There's a bit of ageism maybe in there. But 89% of managers say Gen Z don't have the tech skills that they need. And 47% of over 55s think they're not willing to learn. So it's kind of like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. If you can't onboard them quickly enough and show the rest of the company these people are good enough, then you're almost in this vicious circle of they're never going to be good enough, and the Gen Z, they're just going to leave, right? Why would they stay if they haven't been onboarded? And onboarding is critical to that. You hire people, you sell this image of your company, you say, hey, this is us, we've got this great culture. And then very often your experience drops off a cliff. And this is true for desk-based workers, and it's way more true for frontline workers, right? They're kind of like in the hiring process, I want you because I don't want you to go somewhere else, and I think you're a great person. As soon as you're hired, you're thrown into the lions. That's it. Just have at it. And then you've got this dichotomy of people older than you not respecting you and you not getting what you want or expect. And so onboarding, that's it. That's the experience you need to nail.
Yeah, you setting them up for success or failure. And within
Yeah,
that period,
totally.
onboarding is, potentially several months. Are you meeting the right people? Are you starting to familiar yourself with systems and processes and
Yeah,
policies and all of this stuff? And if it's not there for you, if it's not, kind of
yeah,
written in stone, then there's a disconnect, and that disconnect can lead to frustration and not meeting expectations, like you said. I think that's a huge part of it. I actually
yeah,
think I always said back in the day, like technology should decrease the experience gap, right? Like you should
yeah,
get a better sense of what you're in for before you even start work because of technology and all the
absolutely.
information at your fingertips.
Yeah, and there's this concept of pre-boarding you do now, right? So you're getting stuff before you start work, and also let's be honest, right? People coming to work in a factory or going to work anywhere in retail, they have choice. They can work in a different factory. They can work, and often these things are centered on certain zones or areas. So I was went to see a customer recently, and they were saying one of their problems, they've got a really high retention. But over COVID, a lot of people went to work at the company next door just because a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more money, and they stayed there, right? And so you just that often you're talking about a game of inches. You do a little bit more here, a little bit more here. So I think if you don't give that good experience at the beginning, you're just going to lose them to the company next door.
Is a good comment. Not everything can be chunked down. Would you want heart surgery chunked? Making important things short is not the answer. So yes,
Yeah,
it depends. Like
I
if we survey people in healthcare, it'd be a little bit different.
yeah. I mean, yeah, totally. Yeah, and obviously that's part of the problem, right? It's these people who leave they understand the complexity to the older generation know exactly how something works. They know that this does this, and that complexity is sort of baked into 25 years of experience. It's not something you can write down in 5 minutes. So I think I guess this is in response to the you can do bite-sized 5-minute quick video on how I do something. Absolutely. Yeah, there's a complexity to that you need to spend time on. So that's kind of like the low staff time commitment you can do with those little things around the edges. But then you start to go into more medium staff time commitment and high commitment things like job shadowing, doing office hours where people just pop in, pop out whenever, and giving 15-minute Q&As on what they do. But also really properly going into workshops and formalizing that process as well.
We've studied the skills gap for probably like 10 years at this point. So it's been an issue for a very, very long period of time.
Yeah.
But we haven't really looked at it from a frontline perspective or even like a retail manufacturing perspective either. So we haven't really drilled down. What do you see as the biggest financial impact in these sectors when it comes to filling this knowledge gap?
Yeah. The survey is pretty clear on this, and actually, I was surprised how much time is lost to this, to sort of the skill shortage or knowledge gap inside frontline organizations. And like I said earlier, it's about 14 hours a week per employee. Millennials pick up most of the slack, so it's things like correcting mistakes, teaching or training, troubleshooting tech, or things that just go wrong with their coworkers, or helping coworkers to literally do their tasks. It's not their job, right? So the cost is you're losing. It's not just the people coming into the business who get stressed and decide to go somewhere else. It's the people who do the job, doing something that they're perfectly willing to do. But if it's what you rely on and it's not formalized and consistent and scalable, then it just adds to the stress and makes it more likely that they will leave. But I think a couple of the big ones here, it can be dangerous, right? So whilst the previous ones, you can quantify it, 14 hours a week. I think in retail in the US, it's about 11K a year per employee, per full-time employee. In manufacturing, it's about double that. It's about 20K per employee per year that you lose to this sort of skill gap. But it is dangerous. So 75% of managers we surveyed said that poor onboarding creates health and safety risks. And that directly leads, not just to people being ill or unwell, but to industrial accidents. And those sorts of things can lead to billions of dollars worth of problems. And I think that's the risk there is just huge. So,
Well,
we're talking about
it hurts the product,
yeah.
and it also and lawsuits. There's a lot of implications to it.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and I have to recognize the job I do, I work in tech, I build software. I travel and I sit at a computer. So the worst thing that can happen to me, more or less, on an average day is I'll get a bad back and a bit of RSI in my hands. But somebody working on a production line, that has genuine risks to it. And we can't downplay them. They are serious things.
Name looks familiar. Abby, creating a culture of appreciation is so key. Appreciation isn't just top down. We need to ensure peer to peer recognition is also encouraged. That kind of goes along also with shared learning and that culture where people are just givers, right? It's also recognition's part of it too.
Yeah, it's a massive part of engagement, right? So you can give 150% sometimes, and I mean that's the definition, right? You're engaged. If you look at the sort of Gallup stats on engagement and how they define highly engaged, disengaged, etc., you engage people, they're giving discretionary effort, and that discretionary effort, if it's some people just love it and they'll just always do that, but most people need some kind of recognition and reward for it. And it's not about, and this is where we start to talk about tech as well, it's not about just recognize it by saying, hey, well done, Doris, you did a great job, shake your hand, well done. It's also about using this horrible phrase I've already used once in this webinar, socializing it. It's about getting it's recognizing it in front of everybody. And I think that's the big thing. So people need to be recognized for that. And I think that's up and down the organization. It's not a generational thing. Everybody likes to be recognized.
And it's also part of learning and development, right? I'm doing this task. I think I'm doing it the right way. Maybe I've been mentored and my mentor was like, yeah, I mean, this is how I'm training you to do it. But you really need that recognition to affirm that you are doing it the right way and it's providing good value to the organization or being helpful or whatever that might be. So I think they're just interrelated, as you were saying. Speaking about technology, because obviously that's a lot of what you do. That's your background. Yeah. That's a lot of what we asked in the survey as well. What technologies can companies adopt to better support new hires and upskill existing employees? So basically serving those two big functions.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, it's been mentioned as well. So someone mentioned training systems. So training systems might help you to maybe formalize some of this content, maybe create curriculums as well for onboarding. And I think that's important, having some kind of repeatable workflow you can go through, which can be easily then sort of triggered and replicated and scaled to your whole business. And I think that needs to be built around some kind of centralized, curated repo of knowledge or collective intelligence of the organization. So that has to exist, and there has to be an easy way to maintain that. Otherwise, you're just building a problem for the next person to manage. And the reason scalability is so important, I mean, if you think about a company of 150 people, which is the company I work for, we have people joining every month. If I think about a company of 10,000 people, you've got hundreds, maybe even thousands of people joining every month and seasonal staff coming in. So if you can't really formalize and create a personalized onboarding experience for hundreds/thousands of people at the click of a button, that they can then go through and get that sort of, white glove experience, then you're going to start falling behind, because you're going to be bleeding costs in all sorts of areas and obviously introducing risk like we spoke about. But then I think there's other layers, right? So you've got this curated knowledge repo, then you've got improving internal comms, because at certain times you're going to want to say what you said earlier, right? So how do you make sure people know when they're doing a good job? Also, how do you make sure that everyone knows they're not doing the right thing? Hey, I was just down in the warehouse and I noticed that XYZ, or I went to the store in Southampton or in New York this week and I noticed this. So everyone remember, you have to do XYZ. We have a lot of customers in retail who have to sort of distribute knowledge very, very quickly that changes at the flip of a switch. So for instance, hey guys, there's been a product recall for this. Everybody in the stores, these stores, make sure you do it. And then, there's more layers, right? So that gives you tons of content. And these people are time poor, right? Everyone on the front line is time poor, because as soon as they leave the front line, as soon as they leave the shop floor or the factory or wherever, they're going to go straight to their locker. They're going to get their phone, and they've got maybe 5-10 minutes. And in that 5-10 minutes, right, they're going to check their socials. They're going to maybe message their partner. They're going to, plan tonight. They're going to do whatever they want to do, check the news. You've got like this much time, right? And in that time, I think you have to get them. This is where Gen AI can really be helpful, because it's a shortcut to the reading process. It's a shortcut to the searching process. And I think particularly on smaller screens as well, because a lot of this content's being written by people on bigger screens. and consumed by people on smaller screens. So being able to just very quickly go in and say, and here's a very basic one, what's the holiday booking process, right? How do I book a sick day? How do I do XYZ? How do I, all these questions. And that's before we even go into some of the more complicated ones. So Gen AI has a really strong role here. And then finally, my personal favorite, which is what I said earlier, people misunderstand digitalization, right? Why is work getting more stressful and more complicated for a lot of people? Because we digitized, but we didn't automate. So this automation can take away a lot of the complexity from nowadays. So when you have to go into multiple systems to do something. So as an example, HR processes are really, really susceptible to this problem. You've got workers who have, who don't have a screen. They don't have necessarily a login to all the systems, and we're expecting them to do a lot of paper-based processes, or maybe we have digitized it, but it's complicated. So giving people more time to do their actual jobs by automating some of the simpler things is something that we should definitely be spending time on.
Yeah, and that's the purpose of technology, especially AI, is you're trying to automate the tasks that can scale, as you were saying, through these automated responses. I need this information now. Well, you have a collective LLM where you can extract that type of knowledge on demand. You don't have to, it saves time from always having to going to your manager or a coworker to get the information. Not like that's not helpful, but as like especially in America, like the demands on the workers keep increasing, and there's fewer workers doing more tasks, especially in today's economy. So having that access to just quickly get that information rather than walking, 20 steps to asking that question is pretty useful.
100%. And go ahead. Sorry.
You mentioned millennials are often the ones picking up the slack. Is there anything we should be doing to support this generation more?
Oh, it's fun. That's
this generation is like most of the workforce at this point, right?
It's exactly kinda, right.
You're basically just saying the workforce because it's like 50+% now.
Yeah, I mean, I did a webinar a decade ago, right? And the main strap line for that was "Hug a Millennial," because. So, I mean, is there anything we should be doing to support this generation more? I mean, implementing a better onboarding process for people who come in, because let's face it, millennials at the moment, they're probably, what are they, between late 20s to a very early 40s at this stage. So a lot of them will be progressing in their careers. They've got quite a lot of experience, but they haven't yet got, to maybe where they want to. And so they're going to be, they're the core of your business, right? And I think they want to do their jobs. They're very happy to help everyone else, but they just don't have the time to actually do that. So I think, everything we've spoken about so far would be a good thing to do for millennials right now.
And part of this communication, these repositories, to be able to get this information, we're talking. I mean, that's what we're talking about today. Is we have multiple generations. It's not just millennials. It's not just Gen Z. It's boomers. It's Gen X. I mean, so we're really connecting everyone, which is really important because, if you're a frontline worker, whether you're manufacturing, retail, I mean, you're going to be surrounded by people of different ages and different life experiences. Like it's going to be very, very diverse.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately you really want to improve employee engagement, right?
Yes.
You want to improve employee engagement, reduce active disengagement, and I think one of the reasons for that is because, well, clearly people who are actively engaged give more discretionary effort. People who are actively disengaged, or what we might call nowadays quiet quitters, they're basically switching off, not going the extra mile, maybe not even performing up to the level that you're paying them to. And so I think there are some simple things that you can do. So involving people in the change. And I visited a company recently, and we went around the shop floor. We went around like the manufacturing plant, and we spoke to some of the people who work on the production lines. And I found that super enlightening, because then when you just ask them, what's the one thing that we could do to improve your working day? Actually, it was a very simple thing. It's just make it easier for me to see my shift plan, right? But you do that one thing, and it's like, oh my God, they're going to be so much happier. It removes like several clicks or steps away from their day, and it just makes everything better. So I think if you invest in them and show that they matter, because I do think the stats in the survey show people don't feel appreciated. I think it's half of younger workers don't feel appreciated. They're not considered skilled enough, mainly because of their age, and that weighs heavy, right? And so
I
I
wasn't
think
skilled enough when I was 22. I'll admit that. I mean,
well, this is the thing, right? It's catch 22. So
yeah.
of course, I'm young. I've been here 3 months. Of course, I'm not skilled enough, right? And I think that recognition is important. And I think over a quarter of those we surveyed said they hadn't received the right training. So they're just being dropped in and they're not being invested in. So I think involving them and investing in them is a really key thing.
When you're talking about employee engagement, I do agree. Like everything we're talking about now points to employee engagement and productivity, and then just overall output. Let's be honest. I mean, we're in business here, and that's
Yeah.
what people are at the end of the day evaluated on. So, what are some ways to boost employee engagement and actively reduce disengagement? And you've known, for years and years and years, these Gallup polls they're very
Yeah.
bleak at this point. There's almost no point in looking at the next Gallup engagement poll because we all know what it's going to be. It's going to be depressing, right?
We do. And I mean,
It is never improved.
The one thing that Gallup does well is provide you that solid benchmark, right? The Q12 is so consistent at this point, we could set our clocks by it. And I think I saw recently someone say, "Oh my God, it's got so much worse. But there are more disengaged people and fewer engaged people." And I saw the numbers, and it said something along the lines of 30-something% engaged and under 20% disengaged. I'm like, well, that's the same number that when I first checked Gallup back in 2003. So it's like, I don't think maybe it is improving. I think, like I said, just showing that you're investing in them by caring about the tech that you give them. People have a consumer grade expectation, right? So
yes.
I have time for 3 or 4 apps in my life. I think there's enough data to show that most people are the same. And I'll use TikTok, I'll use a couple of other apps, I'll use WhatsApp to chat to my family. If you don't give people something with that similar level of consumer grade experience, yeah, you might have invested in this homegrown platform where you might have all this amazing expensive tech. But these people, remember, they're time poor. They've got a very difficult job to do that has its risks, and they need to be appreciated. So invest in that.
Oh yeah, I mean, totally agree. And we've done so much work in this area too about consumer grade, and it's the whole reason why there was the bring your own device to work movement
Yeah,
years ago, right? Because people are like, I don't want to use
yeah,
BlackBerry when I come to the office. I want to use the iPhone or an iPhone that I use outside of the office, right? And I use let's say use AI for personal reasons. You want to figure out a recipe for dinner or something. Like you want to use the same technology in the office because you understand the value of it and that it can apply to things that you're working on. So
yeah,
that's part of the
yeah.
thing too. Is people are just used to a certain technology. So if you disrupt them by a weak technology or technology that malfunctions or does not produce what people are expecting based on what they do in their personal life, there's a mismatch and that can cause disengagement.
And you lose your competitive edge because let's face it, your competitors are investing in it. And so that's that thing where you're completely devaluing that bring your own device, right? They do have, the power of a supercomputer in their pocket. And so, being able to leverage that, I think is worth doing because that's what they're getting from other places they could work at.
Why do you think the study found that 72% of managers lack confidence in their company's ability to retain essential skills?
Oof, that's a really good question. Maybe past history, right? Maybe their experiences, and also, a significant number of them have worked there for a while, right? And they might not be so happy with the tech they've got or the processes they've got. I think you need to see people doing the things I previously mentioned, involving you in the change and investing in onboarding, for instance, or in all of these automation processes. And I think if you haven't seen it, then how could you have confidence? I think there's also another dimension to it, which is simply the knowledge sharing and being open and transparent about it. It's a lot of frontline workers are just simply in the dark about what the company really does. What is its higher purpose? What is it? What are we doing next month or next week? Or, and just communicating stuff, sharing stuff between departments. So, if you're just being brought in to do some shift work and you don't feel like people are investing in you from the very beginning, then why would you have any faith that they can change it?
I can imagine frontline workers feel very siloed.
Yeah,
I have to do
totally.
this task. I have to do it every single day, maybe every single second of every day. But I
Yeah,
don't really know outside of what I do how what I do is impacting all these other teams and the end product, and there's disconnects there, and I feel like that's been going on for a long time, just like the skills
Yeah.
gap.
And we're social creatures, right? We want,
Yes.
I've seen this with our customers. I've seen as soon as you give them that ability to be more, part of belong to something bigger than just the production line I'm working on or the store I work in. People want it. They do want to engage in that. And if you can nurture that, then yeah, they're going to be all for it.
We have a good comment here. When feedback is collected, but there's no transparency or follow up, it can really break trust between employees and leadership.
Yeah. Oh, when I worked in surveys, we had this game we played with new customers when we said, the most important thing about feedback isn't collecting it in a survey, it's doing something about it. And then telling people
Yes.
showing you're doing. So the way I used to role play this in a room full of people is I'd say, okay, so asking someone something and then not listening is worse than not asking. And I'd sort of ask somebody their name and they give me their name. And I'd say, what did you do this weekend? And they'd start to answer. And then I'd just move to another part of the room and ask someone else the same question. And then I'd go back to them and ask them how they felt about that. And they're like, well, if I'm completely honest, that sucked. So yeah, totally. Action management, following up, being transparent is number one.
And here's another good comment. Jill, companies have to act on the feedback. Gathering data and not acting is offensive. And honestly, it relates. We did a lot during COVID of like the herds and herds not, like people who, companies that are not really listening to their employees. They're like, here's, a employee satisfaction survey, take it, but we're not even going to look at the results, or we might share, but we're not going to do anything about it.
And response rates go down. So the data shows, right? And this is going back to my survey days, not to my, current days, but the response data year on year shows if you don't do the action management, next year fewer people respond. And when asked why, their number one reason is I said last time and they didn't do anything. And it's like, and that's it. So it's exactly right. I think Jill and I are birds of a feather. Offensive is exactly the word I'd use.
We got one last question.
Okay.
How can frontline comm leaders help older generations to proactively knowledge share with younger generations? Great question.
Yeah. Okay. Really good question, Kylan, and good to see you on the webinar as well. So yeah, I think you need to balance sort of immediate productivity needs with the long-term workforce enablement, right? So I think firstly you need to focus on some immediately scalable ways of enabling knowledge sharing, and I said that earlier. And I think that will increase, how younger generations feel valued as well, and it will also decrease the effort and time and cost for middle generations, and increase agency as well for older generations. So make them feel a little bit responsible for the fact that this ship needs to stay on afloat. Make the middle generations a little bit less feel the pressure, and the younger generations feel more valued. So that's super important. But then invest in better tech, right? And it's like, this is very underserved. It's 80% of the global workforce is in frontline, and a lot of that is in retail and manufacturing. And quite simply, they don't have the best tech for their frontline. So a lot of orgs are putting this off. They're continuing to build an over-reliance on complex, sometimes even homegrown solutions, which are fine, but they're nowhere near where you should be right now, and they're not where you should be in 5 years. So that's important. And the other thing is, this tech is moving fast, right? It's moving super quick. So I guess my final statement on that is, if you're not creating an AI-empowered frontline workforce this year, and that might seem like sci-fi or annoying, or you've heard it 100 times already, I guarantee you your competitors are. So 2025 is the year where workers will start to become more AI empowered. I see it in my organization. I see it with our customers. And I think it's quite hard for some of the customers, particularly in the middle, people around the 500 to 5,000 employees. It's hard for them to fully leverage that and deploy it to their workers. So.
Absolutely. Well, it was a pleasure, Luke. This was enjoyable, as I had thought it was going to be. You shared so much useful information. We loved, talking about the survey, the results, the implications to businesses. Hopefully everyone here who tuned in today got at least one piece of information that they can think about or take back to their organizations. And, please go to getflip.com/insights to download the research study. I think that'll be really helpful for everyone who's tuned in today, because, you can really look at who we interviewed and how they responded, and really go and drill down deeper into the data, more so than what we could have possibly shared in the past 45 minutes. So we hope that you'll take a lot from all of that. And Luke, any final remarks?
No, just thank you so much, Dan, for the opportunity, and thanks everyone who joined. Those were just some really, really good questions. They got me thinking, which is good.
Thanks, everyone. And I'm going to close out the session now. So have a great day, and we look forward to joining you on the next Workplace Intelligence LinkedIn Live.